So it's good to have with us today Bill Willits. If you don't know Bill, he's the Executive Director of Ministry Environments at North Point Community Church. And Bill, as I understand it, your time at North Point goes back to the beginning days of North Point. Isn't that correct?
It does, Tony. There were 6 of us that were part of the originating steering team. And as I'd like to say, I was in the right place at the right time and just happened to be a little bit older than a lot of others.
Well, that's very good. Now, help us, ministry environments. For us normal church people that aren't at North Point, what does that include?
Well, that really includes all of our ministries from children to adults. And so I work with the point leaders of our children's ministries, our student ministries, all of the various adult ministries, and our service programming team.
Well, that's fantastic. You have a lot on your plate then. So the reason why I wanted to connect today is I understand that you have some expertise related to your role regarding small groups. And I just want to be honest with you, as I connect with churches across the country, small groups seems to be one of those areas of ministry that everybody values. They want it to be healthy in their church. They want to offer that as a next step for people. But almost universally, it's an area of frustration for churches as well, and they're finding themselves stuck when it comes to small group ministry. So I wanted to get your perspective, having been engaged with that aspect of the ministry at North Point for the last number of years. What are some common themes that you see that might cause that area of ministry to be stuck?
Well, Tony, what you're asking is a question I hear all the time, and I really think it comes out of the fact that groups are, in my estimation, the hardest ministry any church will try to do because it's the least predictable, it's the least programmed, it's the least controlled environment that a church is going to do. You can have the best laid plans and somebody walks into your small group and drops a bomb or decides not to come and everything changes immediately. So they're very challenging for sure, but I think they're extraordinarily rewarding. And, there are some common themes and common challenges that we tend to have. The first one is that when a church doesn't have a clear or empowered point leader for groups, the group ministry tends to never gain traction. I can tell you from the early days for us, there were 3 of us that wore the group's hat. Andy did it about 10% of the time, I did it about 10% of the time, and Reggie Joyner did it about 10% of the time, which really meant none of us were doing it very well. And so when you don't have a clear point leader really focused, waking up, thinking about it, praying about it, learning about it, enlisting leaders, developing leaders on an ongoing basis, then functionally you're not getting anything done. If you're not getting anything done, then nothing is gaining traction, and you're not building a ministry that's going to have any bearings about it. So clear point leader is extraordinarily important, and one of the reasons why group ministries tend not to gain traction over time.
So I understand completely having that point leader for the overall group ministry is a key, but I'm suspecting that leadership within the groups themselves is also one of those areas. Am I correct, Bill?
Absolutely. And, that kind of brings us up to a second area is really around leader training that tends to be a real important component for getting a group's ministry unstuck. I have found that our tendency is to overcast vision for community and underprepare leaders for leading that community. It's really easy for many of us to get up there and talk about, the Acts church and what happened and what God did in Acts 2 and Acts 6 and really want to see those kinds of transformative communities to be part of our daily experience. And then we go to group, and it tends not to be the same. There are people who won't open up, and there are people there who won't shut up. And so we have that tension that we're navigating, and many times we don't prepare leaders for what real life ministry is all about. And, Jesus talks about he's the good shepherd and we're the sheep, and we all know sheep stink, and so do the people in our groups at times. And so how do we help prepare them for leading in real life situations? And we tend to overcast vision and really underprepare leaders. And that's one of the things that tends to derail us, I think, from having an effective ministry. Or I would say also, we provide training, but it's just not helpful or it's just not timely. And I can tell you from our own experience early on, we have what we would call 6 key leader essentials for a leader. And we were doing all of our training around those leader essentials. And we realized that not everybody was at the same place in the life cycle of their group. And so we were training on things that were helpful, but just not timely. Or in some cases, they were timely, but that we couldn't unpack as much as we wanted to. So I think training is extraordinarily important. We need to make sure that our leaders are adequately prepared, but that we're really setting them up as guides, not directors, and as partners and not trainers. Many times I think we're journeying with people and we're helping them along the way. And sometimes we can set us up as pseudo-experts rather than partners in life and in ministry with people.
I have a friend in ministry talking about the topic of timely training. He likens it to a young father. Before the firstborn comes, you can train them all you want on changing a diaper, but the training really isn't timely until you have that first messy diaper. And so you can use that in your next training, Bill.
I think will be very helpful, especially since the first diaper I changed, I put on upside down. So no training.
All right. Well, here's another aspect, and again, this is coming from my experience, and so I'm wondering if you see
Sure.
it as well. There are churches, not every church gets to launch fresh like North Point and just jump into a small groups model. A lot of churches that I'm working with are still wrestling with a couple different competing models when it comes to next steps to help people connect in community and growing environments. And, specifically, that would include churches that are trying to pull off Sunday school and small groups and mentoring and so on. How do we help churches think through the health of whatever they gravitate to? In this case, we're talking about small groups, because it feels like there could be a tension there and an unnecessary stress if they don't get alignment with what they're expecting those next steps to look like.
That's a great point, because I know that sometimes people come to conferences and think they have to go back and blow up their ministry model or whatever the case may be, and I don't think that's closely or remotely true. I think, Tony, and you bring up a great point, is how can we best leverage those environments to be steps in a process rather than just being all competing strategies or ends to themselves. I think it's important that you have clarity around ultimately where you'd like to have people end up. But as one who led Sunday school in the past, I can tell you that if you position it correctly, it can serve the body of Christ in amazing ways. And besides, if you got about $5 million worth of buildings sitting empty, people are going to look at you with about seven different ways. So to me, I think it's extraordinarily important that you can create them as relational gathering points that help them connect and then move into community. You can help leverage teaching and more of a menu philosophy, if you will, and say, okay, we're going to put out a menu of options of classes and use those as maybe instruction time and use group experience as the download time for that. So I think there's ways to leverage it, but what I would just caution against, again, being one who failed at this, is not have competing strategies. There's a way to make Sunday school and small group work in tandem, and I think it's making sure that you're helping formulate, not just creating a competing ministry model.
Which gets us to this last point. Is at the end of the day, we have to make it easy for people to take their next steps. And it's not the people that are leading the ministry, it's the people that we're trying to reach, that we're trying to encourage to take their next steps, right, whatever their spiritual journey looks like. So help us unpack what that might look like at a church, and maybe even specifically some of the learnings that you've encountered through the years at North Point, Bill.
Well, I think making sure that you have an ultimate destination in mind. I mean, most churches, it depends on who brought you as to where you'll ultimately end up. So if you have a friend who's involved in the student ministry, then they may say the next step for you is to come volunteer with me in the student ministry. Or if you have somebody who is very connected in a production ministry, they may say the next step is to come join me and help volunteer in this area. And I think as a church, both from a volunteer perspective and knowing what the acute needs are, and also from a next step ministry philosophy, it's important to know what is the ultimate destination that you want people to get to. Because if you leave it to chance, then everybody's going to come up with the last person they talk to. And we all know the infamous stories of information centers where people come into the church and they talk to the sweet old lady or old man who gave them a great picture of something. We just don't know what it was, and it certainly wasn't the destination we would want them to go to. And so it's, again, just partnering and being helpful to create an ultimate destination, and then creating ministry environments or ministry steps that help people to get there. So you take the guesswork out of it. Because if everything is equal, then nothing is ultimately going to help get people to where we would like to get them to. So.
Very good. Well, Bill, I appreciate you taking a few moments today to talk about small group ministries in churches. And I don't care what Andy says. I think you're pretty sharp.
That's good.